Welcome to Funnel Hacker Radio Podcast, where we go behind the scenes and uncover the tactics and strategies top entrepreneurs are using to make more sales, dominate their markets, and how you can get those same results. Here is your host, Dave Woodward.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Funnel Hacker Radio. I'm your host, Dave Woodward. You guys are going to love today's topic, and especially our guest. You have the opportunity of meeting Jonathan David Lewis. So Jonathan, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm excited. So those of you guys who may not know Jonathan is a partner and strategy director at McKee Wallwork & Company. Their primary focus is really on helping brands that are either stalled, stuck, or stale. It's one of the main things we're going to be talking about here. He's also, not only is he a partner and strategy director there, he's also an author of a book called Brand Vs.Wild, something I definitely recommend you guys check out. And he's also a Forbes contributor. So Jonathan, again, welcome. Glad to have you on the call. Anything else you want to say to introduce yourself to our audience?
I think you summed it up well. Thanks so much.
Well, good. Well, I want to just kind of dive right into this. This is a topic that people always ask me about, and that is, how important is branding, and does it really matter? And I know that obviously it's kind of your niche and what you guys have been doing. And I think the idea here, which I really love as I take a look at this here, is the idea as far as business strategy and how branding really applies. And most importantly, I'd like, if you don't mind, just kind of tell us a little bit about why you ended up writing this book called Brand Vs.Wild and what wild actually is.
Definitely. Well, I think when you think about branding, how important is it? It's sort of overused and abused a lot in our culture. But I would simply ask, how important is your reputation? Because at one level, really a brand is simply what other people, think of you, whether they respect you. It's kind of the amalgamation of everything you do and everything you are and everything you've done. So if your reputation matters, then certainly your brand matters. And when you think about Brand Vs.Wild, and really at the core of this effort and the research and the book, that everything that went into it, it's really in reaction to what I really feel is the zeitgeist of our time, which is this overwhelming feeling where we're all facing this increased change, this increased pace of change, this uncertainty and ambiguity out in the culture. So you look at any field, you look at politics, you look at business, technology, everything is really, the pace of change is increasing, but it's also in turmoil and there's a lot of chaos. And as a business professional, as a leader, trying to navigate this and trying to understand what to do and stay on the edge and all of those things, it's pretty overwhelming. And in some cases, it's pretty isolating. So that's the wild, that just from a kind of an emotional standpoint. And kind of the core of the book is about how do we, as whether we're a small business owner or an entrepreneur or a marketing professional, how do we build brands? How do we build businesses in the midst of this chaos that is marking the beginning of our century? And there is a way, but it requires a fundamental shift in how we think about success and the tactics we employ to succeed.
I appreciate the fact that you mentioned reputation, because I think a lot of people, especially when we start looking at funnels and funnel marketing and sales marketing and things, that it's really easy to think, gosh, my company's brand really, I don't really have a brand per se, and I don't really have anything that I'm not a Coca-Cola, McDonald's, or any of these major quote unquote brands that people think of. I think the main thing, especially from a marketing standpoint, is the importance of your reputation, and how do you actually control your reputation, not only as the business owner, but also your reputation of your product, the reputation of the company, the reputation of all that you're really doing and what you represent. So I really appreciate, Jonathan, kind of the clarification there. If you don't mind, tell me a little more here as far as this concept of wilderness. I know I was going through your book and stuff, and you talk about these companies that get lost in the wilderness. What wilderness are you talking about, and how does that really apply to our users?
Well, as I mentioned, from an emotional standpoint, we define the wild as just the zeitgeist of our time, which is this overwhelming nature of things. But technically, we define the wild as three factors. And it came from the last decade of research we've conducted, these two national studies that identified 7 factors that affect growth in businesses. 3 of those 7 are external. They're the economy, aggressive competition, and industry disruption. These combined are technically at what we define as the wild, because these are the forces that dislodge us or disorient us as professionals and business owners. they cause us to really wander in the wilderness. If famously Borders, who was highly successful for quite a good stretch, they weren't prepared for the Great Recession. They had a lot of kind of institutional static strength with high inventory and a bad cash position, and they had all these crazy leases that they signed. So when they faced when the recession hit, they weren't in a liquid position. They weren't resilient. They weren't prepared to really manage that change and that chaos. So the wild is from a technical standpoint, are these forces that really dislodge us. What really made the light go on and made us excited was when we discovered the other 4 factors. 4 of the 7 factors that are statistically significant in affecting our growth are internal. They're inside our companies, they're inside of us, they're in our teams, they're within our control, and they are the most likely to be ignored or even misunderstood. And they're things like a lack of focus, a loss of nerve, fear is a big element to this whole wild. Inconsistency, if you're just trying things, you're kind of all over the place looking for easy answers. And then ultimately dysfunction, a lack of alignment, what we call savagery. Inside companies is what holds us back from really managing change and adapting and innovating and also thriving in the midst of this uncertainty.
So let's talk about that savagery thing, because that's kind of an interesting topic that most people don't address when they're talking to business owners. What do you actually mean by savagery?
So, if I had to rank the 4 factors in the most destructive factor that can affect our growth as business leaders and marketing professionals, it's this lack of alignment that we've identified through the research that, it doesn't matter what tactics you use or, what your website looks like or what your logo looks like or really anything you do, if your team is not on the same page, if in fact sometimes are working towards different ends. So in companies, we see this all the time. That's where you get backbiting and gossip and turf wars, all that junk that we find in companies. But in the wilderness, in survival scenarios, this is really the marked difference between groups of people who face the harshest, hellish, environments on Earth and survive versus other groups who face similar circumstances and don't survive. It's not that one group or another has better resources or better knowledge. No, the difference, the fundamental difference is the internal health, the internal dynamics of those teams and whether they're able to have, a real clear alignment about what they're doing, who they're targeting, what they're trying, where they're focusing. That is what marks the difference between the survivors and those that decline into irrelevance.
Pretty good. I actually love that idea. If you don't mind, tell me, how do you get that more cohesive group? I mean, take for example, a lot of the people who listen to Funnel Hacker Radio have smaller companies. It's not uncommon where they're working with a virtual team. We have obviously at the same time we have those companies who are much larger, but for the most part, most of our listeners typically have less than 20, 25 employees. Tell me when you're working with a virtual team or a smaller company, how do you make sure that you have that kind of alignment?
Well, first I'd say if you have a smaller team, you actually have a great advantage because really what we're seeing is that these larger companies, whether it comes to alignment or whether it comes to fear and focus, they are at a great disadvantage because their size works against them. They're slow, they're sluggish. They often become arrogant. They believe what made them successful will make them successful in the future. These are all things that just, spell death in this wilderness that we find ourselves in business. So the smaller the team actually represents opportunity to make sure you're on the same page. What I would say is, whether you're a one-person team or whether you have 25 people, all of these forces are at play in you right now today. And by understanding that there's a very predictable response to disruption, whether, one of the core things we found in our research is that there's psychologically very little difference between a group of people that crash land on top of a mountain and a group of people, working on some sort of business challenge. Both groups psychologically respond to disruption in very similar ways and can get out of it in similar ways. So the first step is to know thyself. I mean, understand how you're going to react to this disruption. Understand how very predictably your team is going to react. And so what we discovered is, of those 4 factors, they hit sequentially. When you're facing some sort of hardship, it could be as big as, you're being disrupted by Uber, or it could be as small as maybe sales are starting to stall and maybe you're starting to drift. You don't really know what to do. Well, what happens is, as soon as something like that hits, fear is your first response. You lose your nerve, and according to our research, you're less likely to invest. You're more likely to lose your focus on your target. You're going to try to be all things to all people. All of these very predictable things start hitting you as a business leader, and you predictably respond with bad decisions. And what's interesting here is, physiologically, you are hardwired to react a certain way, and often you react poorly. You make bad decisions because of that. One of the kind of the cool, interesting areas of survival psychology that we really pulled from, that was highly correlated with our research, was really led by this professor named Dr. John Leach. And what he has put together based on his research is, he essentially says, when anybody in the world faces some sort of disruption or hardship or survival scenario, they fall into 3 categories. 10% of us are prepared. We hit that challenge and we react rationally, logically. We can get through. We can lead other people through. 80% of us are paralyzed by a disruption of some kind. We don't know what to do, so we don't do anything. We freeze, our heart's pounding, our illogical brain takes over from our logical brain. Then another 10% of us actually panic. We make things worse for ourselves and others. So first, know thyself. Where are you falling in that 10-80-10 theory, as Dr. John Leach says? Now, if you're not in that top 10%, you are not prepared to be resilient and to navigate whatever uncertainty comes. If you are paralyzed, then you're falling into that sort of that first reaction to the wild, which is fear. Once you're afraid, you start to drift, you lose your focus. Once you lose your focus, you immediately start acting very inconsistently. You look for silver bullet solutions. And then ultimately, when all of these things culminate, you become savage, you start treating each other poorly. That's when you know this is an existential problem. You're probably close to decision point. Are you going to fail? Are you going to become irrelevant? Or are you going to turn things around?
Very cool. So tell me, what are some of the brand hacks that we're a funnel hacking community, so hacks are a big deal to us. So tell me, what are some of the brand hacks that you can use basically to face this whole wild concept?
First thing I do, whether you are facing disruption or you want to be the disruptor, is use something we call the wall test. So go look at whatever industry you want to disrupt, or your own industry, and just do a big, take 2 hours and just cull over the entire internet, find everything you can find on your competitors, on current status quo in the industry, vendors, etc. Look at their marketing, download their websites, print it all out, and put it on one wall. Do this for yourself as well. Put your marketing materials, put your website, anything you have on the same wall, and then step back and look at the wall, and very quickly, you'll discover, where the conventions. You'll see the same colors. You'll see similar language. It's usually pretty depressing because you'll quickly find out everybody sounds the same. But while you're doing this, you'll find the zig, right? And as you see the zig, you need to start writing down, okay, where's the zag here? Because industries tend to follow each other. There's usually one leader, and then everybody mimics them. And so there's a lot of conventions in a lot of industries. So find the zig, write down your zag, and those zags are the opportunities to disrupt. So you'll be able to evaluate yourself, evaluate your industry, and it's very cheap and it's very easy. Do the wall test.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. So tell me, as we kind of get close to wrapping things up here, what are some of the main things that you think a small business entrepreneur needs to be really focused on to make sure they're aware of those types of things that it keeps them out of the wild? Most importantly, they can zig when they need to zag as well.
Well, first and foremost, know that you are, as a small business owner, you're actually in a position of strength in today's economy. May not feel like it, and that's one of those emotional things. God, everything's so overwhelming. It feels like we're isolated, etc. But you're in a position of strength, so know that and be encouraged by that, and know that all of these old concepts of success, size, scale, longevity, intellectual property, these are things that we've been taught in our MBA programs, that we've learned in our careers, make us successful today, that just are not working anymore. They're either irrelevant or becoming irrelevant, which again means that maybe growth isn't necessarily the goal. Maybe profit is the goal. Maybe scalability is the goal, so you can fluctuate as your industry fluctuates. So these old concepts of success aren't working like they used to. There are new concepts of success, principles required to succeed. Things like flexibility now trumping efficiency. What does that mean? How can, coming from a business leader, what does it mean to prioritize anything over efficiency? That's almost, heretical. Connection now beating craft. In many creative industries, that's heretical. So understand there's actually new principles required to succeed in this very uncertain, high-risk economy that allow us to be resilient, to grow resilient brands, to actually flourish in our size, whether we're small. That means we're nimble. That means we can innovate, and we have higher risk tolerances. So you're in a position of strength. Focus on resiliency.
I love it. So tell me, if a person wants to get a copy of Brand Vs.Wild, what do you recommend? Where do they go?
Well, you can find it anywhere books are sold. Certainly, go to Amazon, pick up a copy, drop me a review. If you want to learn more, you can go to jonathandavidlewis.com, and you can learn more about me and my company, McKee Walwork, and there's a lot of info about the book there as well.
Fantastic. Well, Jonathan, anything else you want to share with our audience before we let go?
I think we've covered quite a bit of it. I would just say focus on that resiliency.
I love it. Well, again, Jonathan, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your sharing with us the importance as far as being that resilient, especially as an entrepreneur and small business owner. Resiliency is obviously one of the most important things that you can focus on. So I appreciate your time and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Funnel Hacker Radio Podcast. If you'd like to be notified anytime we release a new episode, just subscribe over at funnelhackerradio.com. In addition to that, we'd love to send you a free gift. You can find that free gift at funnelhackerradio.com/free trial. One last thing is we love giving away cars. So if you'd like access to a free dream car, all you have to do is go to funnelhackerradio.com/dream car and you'll get all the details. Thanks again for listening.